An almost unthinkable scenario is beginning to materialize. Entire countries closing their doors to trade with the United States. More than 30 nations have already suspended or restricted shipments, according to Reuters data released in August 2024, including not only traditional adversaries, but also decades-long allies such as Germany, France, Austria, India, Denmark, Sweden, Italy, and the United Kingdom. What could drive historical partners to take such a drastic step? At the center of this earthquake lies the abrupt end of the so-called de minimis rule, a regulation that allowed packages worth up to $800 to enter without being taxed. This policy was more than a bureaucratic detail. According to United States Customs and Border Protection, in 2024 alone, more than 4 million parcels entered the country daily under this regime, moving over $1,360 million annually. More than half of those shipments came from China. This mechanism sustained small entrepreneurs, reduced costs for consumers, and fueled the growth of digital trade. But when the White House canceled the rule nearly 2 years earlier than Congress had scheduled, the immediate effect was chaos. Customs offices had no clear guidelines, global shipping companies such as DHL had no clarity on how to apply taxes, and foreign governments began suspending deliveries altogether to avoid legal risks. How could the world's largest consumer market suddenly turn into a space of such uncertainty? The decision turned a consolidated flow of trade into a labyrinth of doubts. Products that once crossed borders with ease now face blockages, extra costs, and indefinite delays. For consumers, this means fewer choices and higher prices. For small businesses, it represents the risk of losing what was often their only way to compete in a globalized market. This is not merely a dispute over tariffs. It is a test of the United States' credibility within the international trading system. When allied nations prefer to interrupt shipments rather than face the instability created by Washington, the message is clear. The world is no longer willing to accept confusing, unilateral rules. The question that remains is how far this loss of trust can spread, and what the political and economic costs will be of a collapse that began quietly, but now threatens to become irreversible. The $800 rule for years. Millions of Americans bought clothes, electronics, toys, and even food from other continents without ever worrying about taxes. This was only possible thanks to an almost invisible policy, the exemption for packages worth up to $800. That rule transformed e-commerce, cut costs, and opened doors for small businesses to compete in a market dominated by giants. According to United States Customs and Border Protection, in 2024, more than 4 million parcels entered the United States daily under this category, moving goods worth over $1,360 million annually. This mechanism sustained stories much closer to everyday life than one might imagine. Picture a small cell phone accessories shop in Chicago that relied on imported chargers and cables from China to serve customers quickly. Or a fashion studio in Los Angeles that sourced Italian fabrics without the extra weight of tariffs, creating exclusive pieces to compete with major brands. For these entrepreneurs, the rule was not just convenient, it was the difference between existing and disappearing. But the White House decided to end this benefit abruptly, nearly 2 years before the deadline previously approved by Congress. The impact was immediate. According to DHL, one of the world's largest logistics companies, there was no clarity on who should collect taxes or how digital export systems should adapt to the new requirements. If even a multinational with decades of experience was paralyzed, imagine the effect on small family businesses operating with razor-thin margins. The result was an explosion of costs for end consumers. A product that once arrived for $100 suddenly cost $180, $260, or even $300. The National Retail Federation warned in September 2024 that this shift could trigger a drastic fall in sales, hitting not only importers but the entire retail chain. And when consumers pay more, they buy less. When they buy less, the wheel of the economy grinds to a halt. This leads to a broader reflection. Could a policy designed to reduce dependence on imports have ended up suffocating exactly those who most needed access to them? For anyone following this crisis, understanding what is at stake goes beyond tariffs. It is about the survival of millions of small entrepreneurs. That is why, if you want to keep following how these decisions directly shape the future of the global economy, subscribe now to Tellnomics, leave a like, and share this video. Your participation is what keeps this discussion alive. The burden on consumers and small businesses. Those who feel the effects of the new policy most directly are not the large conglomerates, but ordinary consumers and the small entrepreneurs who sustain the local economy. According to a report from the United States International Trade Commission published in July 2024, small businesses account for more than 44% of American exports and depend on imported inputs to keep their operations running. When a simple shipment of electronic parts or foreign fabrics doubles in price, it does not just mean lower profits, it represents a real risk of bankruptcy. Consider a concrete example, a family-owned toy factory in Italy that exported to American clients. With the new tariff uncertainty, each shipment became a minefield of additional costs and bureaucracy. The same applies to a textile company in India, which saw the United States as the ideal market to expand. With poorly defined rules and unpredictable fees, these exporters made a clear decision: suspend deliveries. And if even companies with long-standing relationships pulled back, what is left for American resellers who depended on those products? The impact reaches store shelves almost immediately. The National Retail Federation warned that with the new costs, a product that once sold for $100 can easily reach $260 or even $300. For families already facing inflation of 3.2% in 2024, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, each price increase on imported goods represents a loss of purchasing power. This pressure comes at a time when real wages have remained virtually stagnant for more than a decade, as shown by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. But something even more symbolic is happening. What seemed like just a customs rule has turned into a signal of global rupture. While the United States sees consumers paying more and businesses suffocated, other countries are seizing opportunities. Canada began supporting its small businesses with alternative routes to meet demand. Brazil, even with import tariffs of 50%, intensified agreements with Asian markets. And China, the primary target of American pressure, diversified supply chains and maintained a steady flow of goods to Europe and South America. And here lies the uncomfortable question. Could the policy meant to strengthen the American position have actually handed strategic ground to its competitors? If consumers are paying more and businesses are closing their doors, who truly benefits? This contradiction reveals that the dispute is not only economic, but also political, opening the path to a reshaping of global power dynamics. The global response to American chaos. The domino effect of the tariff decision was immediate and global. Entire governments began protecting their national industries in the face of American uncertainty. France, Germany, India, Switzerland, and even the United Kingdom announced the suspension of deliveries, prioritizing their exporters rather than risking losses and legal disputes. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was a clear message that the world is no longer willing to submit to Washington's improvisation. The situation became even clearer when logistics giants such as DHL declared in September 2024 that they had no clarity on how to apply the new rules. The company, considered a benchmark in international operations, admitted it did not know who was supposed to collect taxes or how to transfer payments to U.S. Customs. If even a corporation with decades of experience and a presence in more than 200 countries could not operate under the new guidelines, how could small family-owned factories in Italy or weaving companies in India find a way forward? The response was pragmatic: suspend shipments. According to the European Shippers Council, many small and medium-sized European businesses faced a double risk: either pay taxes they could not calculate or face lawsuits for failing to comply with poorly explained rules. By halting deliveries, their governments signaled that protecting their domestic production base was more important than maintaining access to the U.S. market. This move was not only economic, but also political, a statement of sovereignty. The micro-conflict is clear. On one side, Washington insists on defending a strategy it calls national protection, but one that creates uncertainty even for its closest allies. On the other, countries that were once submissive now assert themselves, showing they can prioritize their exporters without fear of retaliation. This reversal of roles leaves a disturbing reflection hanging in the air. Could the United States, for decades the uncontested leader of international trade, be on the verge of losing its privilege to dictate the rules? What once seemed like a mere customs adjustment has turned into a historic test for American credibility. The world is watching and already reacting, and with every new country suspending shipments, the United States' image of predictability grows weaker. And in geopolitics, when trust erodes, real power begins to slip through the fingers. The loss of America's historical advantage. At the beginning of the tariff war, Washington's logic seemed unshakable. The United States was the largest consumer market on the planet, and that gave it a natural advantage. Countries such as Mexico, Brazil, China, and even European allies had built their economies around stable access to the American buyer. This was Donald Trump's trump card: impose tariffs and assume others would accept losses simply to keep the American market open. But that calculation began to unravel quickly. China, the main target of the offensive, responded swiftly. According to China's Ministry of Commerce, in 2024, Beijing expanded domestic subsidies by more than 300 billion yuan, about $42 billion, to support factories hit by falling exports. In addition, it accelerated the internationalization of the digital yuan, creating new payment channels beyond the reach of the dollar. These moves sent a clear message: China's economy would no longer depend on Washington's will. Meanwhile, Brazil, historically dependent on soybean sales to the United States, which exceeded 35 million tons in 2020 according to the Companhia Nacional de Abastecimento, redirected record exports to China and other Asian countries. India shifted its focus towards strengthening domestic consumption, a policy confirmed by the Reserve Bank of India, which reported more than 6% growth in retail sales in 2024. Even Europe, traditionally aligned with Washington, intensified regional agreements such as the reinforced trade pact with Mercosur, showing less dependence on the American market. The irony is clear: the policy that sought to reaffirm America's economic power accelerated the construction of alternatives, and once created, these new supply chains rarely disappear. If the world proves it can function without depending on American consumption, Washington's former supremacy loses its value. Here arises the central question: was U.S. economic power never as solid as it seemed, but rather an illusion sustained by the lack of alternatives? Now that such alternatives exist and are operating, regaining leadership may be far more difficult than the White House anticipated. The shock at the heart of American consumption. The impact of tariffs struck at the most sensitive moment for the U.S. economy: the Black Friday and Christmas shopping season. Historically, these 2 months account for nearly 20% of total annual retail revenue, according to the National Retail Federation. But in 2024, this consumption cycle was marked by product shortages, abrupt price hikes, and packages stuck in customs. Amazon, the country's largest online retailer, reported in August 2024 a 40% drop in summer sales, according to the Financial Times. If even the e-commerce giant feels the squeeze, imagine what this means for small retailers who rely on the steady flow of cheap imports to survive. For them, what once represented the hope of closing the year in the black turned into the risk of sinking into debt. The average consumer is already noticing the impact in their wallet. Sneakers manufactured in Vietnam that cost $120 in 2023 rose to $200 in 2024, according to global data. A cell phone accessory from China once sold for $20 now exceeds $40. These increases erode purchasing power in a country where real wages barely grew by 1% in the past year, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The problem goes beyond statistics. It touches cultural symbols. A soccer team jersey purchased in London, a leather handbag from Milan, or electronics from Paris that once arrived easily in American homes have become luxury items or simply unavailable. This void does not only mean less consumption, it represents collective frustration during a season that traditionally fuels optimism and economic confidence. The White House defended the policy as an effort to protect domestic jobs. But the contradiction is obvious. How can you protect workers if domestic consumption, the engine of the economy, is being strangled by rising prices and empty shelves? This question echoes among families, small businesses, and even international allies who now see the fragility of a system that long presented itself as unbreakable. And when consumer confidence falters at the very heart of global capitalism, the lingering doubt is, how long can the United States sustain the idea of abundance that has always been the foundation of its economic identity? A world learning to live without the United States. For decades, factories spread across China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and other Asian countries sustained American consumption with affordable products that filled store shelves and supported family lifestyles. Now, with higher tariffs and uncertain rules, that link has been severed. The result is immediate. Costs rise, variety disappears, and purchasing power shrinks. But the impact goes beyond domestic economics. It exposes something deeper. The possibility that the world is already testing a future where the United States no longer occupies the center of global trade. The new supply chains built in response to tariff policies make this reality clear. China expanded trade routes through South America and Europe, using the digital yuan as an alternative to the dollar in certain transactions, according to a 2024 report by the People's Bank of China. Brazil set records for soybean exports to Asia, surpassing 55 million tons in a single year, according to the Companhia Nacional de Abastecimento. Europe reinforced regional pacts to reduce dependence on American buyers. Each of these moves weakens the idea that Washington still dictates the rules of global commerce on its own. For the American consumer, the consequence is clear: paying more and receiving less. For small businesses, it means choosing between shutting down or migrating to alternative markets. And for international allies, it is proof they can respond firmly without fear of losing access to the U.S. market. The crisis revealed that American supremacy was not unbreakable. It was sustained by trust that is now fracturing. The warning is direct. Once parallel systems are created, they rarely disappear. If the world demonstrates it can grow without relying on American consumption, regaining lost influence will be nearly impossible. Global trade, which for decades revolved around Washington, may now be entering a new multipolar era. And here arises the inevitable reflection. Are we witnessing the end of a historical cycle in which the United States was synonymous with abundance and economic centrality? If so, this is only the beginning of a transformation that will reshape not only markets, but also global politics. Thank you for following this analysis on Tellnomics. If this content helped clarify the impacts of the trade war, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave your comment. Your participation strengthens our community and motivates us to bring more stories that connect numbers to power. Until next time.